Hey, physics peeps, we need to take notes on projectiles. And so, in your notebooks, I would like you to copy down some notes. You need to show this to your guest teacher or your substitute that's in the classroom today. And yeah, we need these before we actually get into doing a lab dealing with projectiles, and where we're going to investigate some things about how projectiles move through the air. So, let's get going. So I need you to copy this down in your notes. The terms that are used here, you're going to be using, and I want you to say them as you're writing them down because you got to use them in order to actually know how to describe them. So when we talk about a projectile, it might be a term that you have heard before, that you have used maybe in other places. But a projectile is anything that's moving through the air. And the thing about projectiles is that there's only one force acting on it, and it's gravity. Gravity is the only force acting on that object. You can have air resistance as well, but gravity is the main force acting on it. And really, it's an object that's in free fall. So that's how we describe projectiles. It could be anything that's dropped, or if something's thrown up in the air. And that's kind of it. But some other terms that you need to know is the trajectory. The trajectory is the path the projectile follows. And that's, again, whether you drop it, the trajectory we say is just a straight line going down. If you throw an object up, its trajectory is just it going up and coming back down. When you throw it at an angle, the trajectory is just the shape or the path that it follows. It's the trajectory. But when you do throw it at an angle, it has this curved shape to it, and we call that shape a parabola. Say that word, parabola. It's not parabola, parabola. Then the range. The range is the horizontal distance the projectile travels. So when we say the horizontal distance, we're only measuring along the ground. So when something's dropped straight down, we say that the range is 0 because it starts here from where it's dropped on the ground right here, and it lands in the same spot. The range is 0. When something's thrown straight up, its range is also 0, or it's incredibly small. But if you throw it at an angle, the range you measure just from the ground where you started to where it lands. That is considered the range. This is not the range. The path that it follows, that's the trajectory. The range is just along the ground. So those 3 terms you need to know. Make sure that you have these in your notes because you have to show that to your guest teacher or your sub. But that's your notes. Then part 2, on a separate sheet of paper, open up to a separate sheet of paper. We're going to get lab 6A started. So you need to have lab 6A written at the top of a separate sheet of paper. This is what we're going to use for a lab on Friday. And you need to have this plus a couple other things written down into your notes. So again, separate sheet of paper, want you to have this stuff written down and this awesome diagram. And we're going to study projectiles and really kind of find how projectile or the range of a projectile is affected by the angle that it's launched at. We're going to take some data with that. And so we're going to use projectile launchers. I'll show you what that looks like on Friday. And your group is going to change the angle of the projectile launcher in order to figure out how far that projectile will go. And we're going to have markers on the floor where we can measure out and determine what that range is. What you need are 3 lab notebooks, a marble launcher, I'll get that to you, I'll show you what that is, a meter stick, length of tape, and a notebook and a pencil. Really all this stuff you'll end up gathering up that day. And that's kind of the gist of it. This diagram, what it's really describing is how you do the lab. Usually you can assign roles to people. You have one person who's in charge of the launcher, and if you want to rotate that role, that is just fine. But usually you have one person who's in charge of launching the marble launcher. Then you have one person who's usually the recorder, and they're going to record the data. You have one person who's in charge of catching the marble. Don't lose your marbles. You can't lose your marbles. It's $1. Then one person who's in charge of actually watching where it lands. It happens quick, and what you typically want is you want to watch exactly where it lands, not lands, bounces, and rolls off the ground, where it lands the first time. And you can put like your toe where it lands, and then you can use a meter stick to measure how far it went. You can put little pieces of tape on the floor though to help out with that, because instead of measuring from the beginning all the way to the end at the to begin with, you can put little pieces of tape on the floor, and you can measure in between the pieces of tape if they're spaced out 1 meter. So if it lands right here, you could count it like if the pieces of tape are 1 meter apart. That's what you want to do. You'll end up doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meters. And then you can put the meter stick in between here and figure out how many centimeters it is. So if it's like 75 centimeters, you would say your range is 5.75 meters. That's kind of it. And easy going. But if it does not land on a piece of tape, like you can't call this 5 meters because it didn't land on the 5 meter mark. You can't call it 6 meters because it didn't land on the 6 meter mark. All that stuff. And cool beans. So if you have fewer people in your lab group, then you just need to make sure that, whoever's launching, there's probably going to be recording everything as well. And whoever's watching for where that marble lands, you're probably watching also where that, or you need to catch that marble. And don't let it roll under floors or things, or doors, things like that. But then some other rules to keep in mind as you're doing this lab. I'll reiterate these on Friday, but on Friday we're going to be trying to get going quickly so that you can do this lab. It takes all period to do it. So don't lose your marbles. It's $1. You can't launch your marbles at others, meaning like you don't intentionally shoot it at and hit somebody with the marbles. People that do that, you're out of lab for the rest of the day. We call home, and then we see if you're in lab the rest of the year. I'll talk about that on Friday. So don't launch marbles at others. Then don't look down the barrel. I'll let you figure out that one. And then pull the launcher back to the second, third, or fourth notch. You'll have 5 notches that you can choose from. 2, 3, or 4, that's what you choose, and you stick with it the rest of the lab. So either notch 2, 3, or 4, you just choose one and you go with it. Don't use 1 or 5. Don't use 1 or 5. It's pretty inconsistent when you choose those. But last thing that you need, this also goes on your lab. Again, this is separate from your notes, but you put it on a separate sheet of paper. You have to show this to your teacher or to the guest teacher. You don't hand this in. You keep it for Friday when we do the lab. Then you will also need to add this to that lab. So part 2, there's going to be 3 questions you answer, A, B, and C. Just write part 2, A, B, and C. Part 3 has a data table that you'll end up recording. I want you to copy this data table and have it in your note in that lab sheet before we go out, so that everybody's ready in your lab group and things go pretty smoothly. You can record data while you're out there, and this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to be launching it at these angles. I'll show you how you adjust those angles on the marble launcher, and then you're going to record the range of your launcher. That's kind of it. So once you have this stuff copied down, what I want you to do, make sure you show your guest teacher or your substitute the notes, you have to show them the notes in order to leave class today. You also need to show them your lab sheet. You don't hand these things in. You make sure that you have these things and the data table. That's kind of it. All right. Take it easy, guys. See ya.